Hey friends, it is that time of year. This podcast comes out, of course, on Thursday, and this Saturday launches Pride Month. I know you've all been waiting for this as we have 30 days of having an ideology and a worldview shoved down our throats, which those of us who embrace Jesus and the Word of God find absolutely repulsive. But nevertheless, here we are again. And so we're going to be talking about some interesting things. In fact, Walmart seems to be racing off the same cliff that Target raced off last year. We're going to talk about that. What is going to be the response of retailers? We also are looking at some more lies that are coming out regarding the whole COVID con. We'll be sharing that with you. Talking about the World Health Organization's pandemic agreement, which is very, very scary for anybody who loves freedom. And most importantly, we're going to continue our study of the Jonathan Cahn book, Return of the Gods, talking about the Stonewall riots and how Stonewall was an entryway, a very strategic convergence of factors that led to this explosion called the LGBT movement. You will not want to miss this podcast today.
Hey, welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
We're so excited to be with you guys, probably because we're only days away from a month that I know you are all really, really excited to celebrate again. Drew, Saturday, Pride Month.
Yeah, Pride Month, the month of June.
But I'm not to get too far ahead of the show here. But I find it interesting, again, that our topic today, our topic really for the next couple of weeks, we did not plan this. You know, we don't have lots of hours we spend in in-depth planning of this podcast. I know it's a surprise to all of you out there because you probably think we spend 60, 80 hours a week just doing research for this. Actually, it's more like 6 to 8 seconds a week. No, a little bit longer than that.
Yeah, it takes me a while to read the chapters.
We appreciate Jonathan Cahn helping us out. But seriously, the convergence of our topic and the fact that we're only days away from, again, a month that has been kind of co-opted by the enemy to celebrate things that are clearly against Scripture is no coincidence. And we're going to get into a lot of the roots behind this, even why the month of June. Jonathan Cahn goes back into the ancient text, so to speak, as we look at this perversion from several millennia ago, and you see why the month of June is so strategic. And so, not to give away a future podcast, but we're going to get into all of that. But before we do, I always love to pull out news headlines, and because really what it says is what we're talking about is so contemporary, so relevant, and that the Bible speaks to these things, which is what this podcast is all about. So, we talked last year, or about last year's Pride Month, and how our major retailers took an absolute beating, most notably Target. Target
Bud
lost.
Light, whatever.
Yeah. Target lost $9 billion amid the Pride merchandising controversy. That was a B, $9 billion. And yet there was no repentance. This year they're choosing where they're going to be placing the material. And more conservative communities, obviously, it's not going to be in the store. In other places, it'll be in the back of the store. And then in some of their more urban and liberal areas, cities, they'll go on doing
Chicago,
what they did last year.
Yep.
But $9 billion, like if I'm a shareholder, I would be having people's heads, like, what are you? Right. You're losing lots of value, and your job as a shareholder is to make sure that the company stays profitable, right? You hold them accountable. So no repentance. They're trying to play both sides of the fence. That's why it's all the more shocking when you read this article, and this is stunning to me. Walmart. Good old Walmart promotes Pride merchandise as Target scales back following backlash. It says last year Target faced huge backlash from conservatives over its Pride merchandise. Walmart promoted its new Pride apparel on social media ahead of Pride Month on Saturday, writing on Instagram, "Not just a slogan. Pride always is a reminder to lead with love." And again, that's that whole lead with love. That love has no boundaries. Love has no definition. Love has no morality. Love has no decency. Love is just whoever we feel like
Love is
having sex with.
Permissive of everything.
Yeah. You just love everybody and love everything.
Yeah.
But Walmart, it's disturbing to me because Walmart, again, was founded by a believer with Christian values, and for years has been kind of that way. But as it's grown, the older I get, the more I realize Jesus had it right when he said, you can't love me and mammon at the same time. Walmart is a behemoth. I forget how many people that they employ, but to see them caving is disappointing. Yeah. And I would just say to our listeners, I think Walmart needs to receive the same treatment that the Target received from conservatism, from people who love the Lord. The only thing that they understand or that gets their attention is a precipitous drop in revenue. And I'm hoping that there will be people besides us calling for again, Christians to make a wise choice of where they spend their dollars. At some point, you run out of places where you're going to spend your dollars, right? And then I guess we start our own chains and our own clothing lines and everything else. But again, very, very disappointing. You got any thoughts on that? Why would Walmart walk off the same cliff that Target walked
Well,
on?
I think the name of the month give it is the indication is Pride Month. It's pride. To me, it's a pride. Like, we're untouchable. Nothing will bother us. We get to tell people what we promote, and what we promote, people should accept. I honestly think. It's not just Walmart. Look at all these other corporations. Look at Disney. Look at Warner Brothers. Look at Hollywood Studios. Look at Bud Light. Why would they even come up with that in the very beginning? Is a sense of elitism,
right?
Which is, to me, pride.
Well, and yes, I guess it's properly named when you take pride in things that we should not have pride in, things we should be ashamed of. You get blinded, and of course, what Jonathan Cahn's talking about in the Return of the Gods book is just simply this is not just about dollars and cents. This is an ideology. This is really a demonic. Demonically inspired movement that we'll unearth a little bit today. So that explains, I guess, some of the blindness. But my goodness, you would think that everybody would absolutely be, you watch Target grab the hot pot and burn their hands, right? To the tune of billions of dollars. You would think that everybody else is like, don't touch the pot, it's hot, But here we go, right off the same cliff again. So I do hope that parents, we said this, we're not about boycotts, we're about stewardship. I like phrasing it that way. Boycott sounds reactionary and all that, but stewardship just simply says, you know what? It's like, I give the example, if you're going to go out and get a cup of coffee and you have a choice, why do you go to Starbucks when they absolutely attack everything you stand for as a Christian? Why don't you take your dollars and go to Dunkin' Donuts or somewhere else that sells coffee, or to a local coffee shop and support those people that share your values? It's just, to me, a matter of a good stewardship. I'm not going to spend the Lord's money and what God's blessed me with on institutions and businesses that are blatantly, I'm not talking about, they're just secular. I'm talking about blatantly go against what you stand for, and just like shove it in your face. Like, if you don't like it, go somewhere else. Fine, I will. And I've been making those choices for many, many years. But I just encourage our listeners. Walmart needs to have a massive wake up call this time around, and I hope others get exposed if they try to do the same thing and learn from it. I also wanted to bring up something that I thought was very, very good. I got so much here to talk about. This was interesting. We just had a great speaker come in and highlight the 3 biggest lies from the COVID con.
Yeah.
Well, there's more and more lies coming up. Some of this was just common sense, like the masking thing, You're sitting on an airplane, and you can take your mask down while you eat your pretzels, but you have to keep your mask up when you're not eating pretzels. Like, aren't you afraid that if there's a virus running around the plane, that you could actually get it while you're eating your pretzels, but obviously pretzel eating made you immune to the disease. Because you could sit there and nibble on your pretzel, but as soon as you were done with that pretzel, man, they wanted it up right under your eyeballs.
Well, that's why you got people eating the pretzels as slow as possible. Everyone developed a skill of eating one crumb of salt on the pretzel at a time for a 3-hour flight.
Pretzel stick for a 3-hour flight. but I just common sense goes, wait a minute, and then all the quarantines basically, right? We're going to quarantine the healthy people. Except if you need to go out and get marijuana, go to a strip club, or have an abortion. Then you could go out because those were essential services. But the rest of us, folks, trying to run our businesses or have a worship service, sorry, we got to be quarantined. Now, anybody with a brain realizes either everybody's locked down and nobody can leave and go anywhere. If you let one person break quarantine, then the quarantine doesn't work anymore, right? Because the whole purpose of a quarantine is to keep people isolated and separated. And so if you allow people to go to the big box stores, which was what the government said we could do, you're still, it just doesn't make sense. And then the one that we both love was, when they treat you like an absolute child. We saw all the government officials doing hand washing illustrations, like we don't know how to wash our hands. But my favorite, and I know it was yours too, was trying to follow the arrows. On the
arrows in the grocery stores. Yes.
So to make sure, God forbid, we pass somebody. So it was just fun going on the wrong side of the highway with your shopping cart. Excuse me, hello, how you doing? Until the police came, the shopping police came and arrested you. But here's another big lie, and this just ticks me off after all the ridiculousness that we went through. This is entitled Fraud and Subterfuge. Experts detail actions of public health officials during the pandemic. And so basically we're finding out about this virus, the Wuhan virus that everybody said did not come from Wuhan. Well, it looks like it did come from Wuhan. But this was interesting. In addition, recent testimony from Fauci and former NIH Director Francis Collins, who's supposedly a believer, divulged that the practice of social distancing, that is, remaining 6 feet apart from other people, that was mandated across the country was in fact fabricated. That means they lied. Fabricated without any evidence to justify it. As noted by Wesley J. Smith, Senior Fellow at the Discovery Institute Center on Human Exceptionalism, the practice, quote, kept people from visiting hospitalized patients, holding the hands of dying loved ones, and attending funerals. It increased social isolation, led to suicide, and made life miserable in a myriad of ways, large and small. They also made life miserable for most churches because any pastor that bought into this nonsense was trying to keep their people separate, had to limit who could come. Space. We had X's tape on. I say we didn't do it, but I saw churches with X's on their seats saying how many spaces had to be apart just to worship. I mean, it was ludicrous. And so I guess I just want to say loudly and clearly, people, please take your mask off. They don't work. And people, please stop this nonsense. I mean, people will get irritated at the store. Like if you were checking out and you got too close to somebody in front of you, they would look at you like, excuse me, like you're entering my sacred space.
I was at a restaurant in a progressive area, not in this area, and the waiter come up to us, and he was instructing me and my wife that if we got too close to him, then we were sitting there. He was coming to us, and he was telling us if we got too close to him, then he will have to remove us. This is the first thing he said to us.
Welcome.
Welcome. Just want to let you know.
You're seated.
We're seated.
And he's worried that you're going to get too close to him.
Yep. And it was a disclaimer they give out. I was like, wow, way to make people feel welcome to your establishment.
But I just want people to remember this kind of ridiculousness because we're approaching another election. And I do not put it past people who live for one thing, and that's to remain in power. I do not put it past them to do whatever they have to do to win an election. Of course, the timing of all this last COVID episode was right before a national election, and And now we're hearing rumblings that there's another variety, another strain that we all need to be worried about. And I just want to encourage people, don't you dare listen to any of this nonsense. Don't obey any of this type of nonsense under the banner of public health or whatever other banner they're waving. If your common sense and your conscience are telling you this doesn't make sense, then follow your conscience. And live as a free person. But this really, really irritates me because we've got people, in our church family who their parents passed away during this time. They were not able to visit the nursing home. They were not able to visit them in hospitals. And it's really a sad state of affairs. I mean, there's a lot of deep pain associated with this, not to mention high school graduations and sporting events that were canceled. And I mean, just it was an absolute disaster. I could get frustrated.
Because the point is, it didn't have to be that way. It didn't have to be
that way at all. But it's amazing how people just embrace it, hook, line, and sinker. And anyway, a couple quick things I just want to touch on. The World Health Organization, which what a worthless institution that is. I would, if I'm running for president, we're not taking part in the World Health Organization. They can fund their own ridiculous budget because they are worthless. But now they're pushing to basically remove the national sovereignty from individual nations, and that when it comes to another health crisis, they're going to have the power to make policy. So the United States government and United States representatives no longer are representing us. At that point, we kick into World Health Organization agreements or something like that. Now, you pointed out that we think this is falling apart right now. People.
I read the headline somewhere, but I haven't been super on top of it.
But here's what the World Health Organization pandemic agreement would do. It would threaten our national sovereignty. It equates the health of humans with animals and plants.
Oh, great. Yes.
So now we're including plant health and animal health at the same level of priority as human health, which is just from the pit of hell. It calls on nations to combat any misinformation that reduces trust in the government. Now, we just said we shouldn't be trusting the experts because here's why. They lie because they have an agenda. And now this is scary to me because basically any kind of social media voices to the contrary, even from legitimate experts, like, hey, that might not be true, or, the data says this. Those people were absolutely silenced and accused, again, of misinformation. And so now we're having the government censorship of communication and ideas all under the name of you're undermining trust in the government, which is ridiculous. It empowers private sector forces such as social media companies to ramp up censorship of disfavored viewpoints, i.e. Christian viewpoints. Supports quotas and gender diversity, aims to create equity-driven national healthcare systems around the globe. I mean, this thing is a disaster.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, it's like, no, DC controlling our lives is, not enough. They're too close to home. We don't need local, statesmen to represent us. We want DC to represent us, and who knows nothing about us, who has completely different value from us. But that's not even bad enough. Instead, we're gonna farm our freedom of health, our freedom of speech, freedom of our religious practice to another organization that's not even on the same nation as we have, even further away nations, because they understand us even better. They share our same values as more. I mean, it's you can't make this stuff up.
This is like Tower of Babel revisited.
No, that's exactly
stuff.
Yeah.
And we're talking
sci-fi.
about the World Health Organization, made up of countries, some of whom hate us as a nation. Yeah. Many of whom do not share our Judeo-Christian values at all. In fact, I just saw where some of the World Health Organization resolutions had to do with attacks on Israel and Israel's response to the Hamas attack on them. And so now we have the World Health Organization making statements about a geopolitical, situation of which is not even under their purview. Anyway, it's just government, and it's wicked, and again, it robs the individual of our God-given freedoms and our inalienable rights.
People who aren't even close to us or represent us.
Yeah, who don't share our values at all. And then to suggest again that these nations have the right to come up with some treaty that we and all Americans have to submit to, including our own government officials, because we have willingly ceded away our sovereignty, is unbelievable. But I'm glad. I think people have been talking about it. We've talked about it at our church, and made people aware. And I think, as you said, the coalition that they need to get this passed is crumbling.
It's crazy that there was a coalition in the first place. I mean, I don't want people in D.C. deciding on the education of my kids or my free speech.
Yeah.
I want guys or gals in our local community who have to face me.
Yeah.
Right? That's
Exactly.
what democracy is supposed to be. They have to face me. They have to face their constituents in town halls to say, how dare you do that?
Exactly.
Or great job, you did that.
And now instead, what we get from a lot of our elected officials locally is, well, I'm sorry, this is just coming to us from the federal government. Our hands are tied, and usually our hands are tied means there's money attached to whatever this is they're shoving down our throat, and so we have to go along, or else we're not going to get the funding we need. But you're exactly right. This was intended to be local. Through relationships, through local values, through looking people in the face, being held accountable.
Yeah.
And if something goes wrong, or you got someone that goes way off the tracks, guess what? You run against them and you get them out of office. That's
We've fallen a little bit away from that today.
Yeah, like a lot. But anyway, all right, let's get into really the foundation of a revolution as that we're highlighting here that has not only shaken America and taken America by storm, but this is a global revolution. Jonathan Cahn calls it this section in his book, The Explosion. And I think it's an apt title because what we've seen is an explosion of perversion. We would, biblically speaking, call it perversion, as we even have a whole month dedicated to this perversion now. And he's going to talk about how these, a convergence of a number of things. We've been talking about Ishtar and the spirit that's behind her. And you can go back to some of these ancient writings, and what you find, as he points out, is the ancient writings are almost an archetype of exactly what we saw happen in America. And to put things historically in perspective, we're talking about 1969, late June 1969. Of course, this is the ushering in of the whole sexual revolution, which erased biblical norms for sexuality. It was a season of rebellion, free sex, drugs, the whole nine yards, Woodstock, all of that. But he says that sexual revolution, was the start, but what came next was an absolute explosion. And so let's get into that explosion. What is known as Stonewall, or the Stonewall Riots, or the Stonewall Uprising, got its name from an inn in Greenwich Village in New York called the Stonewall Inn. The inn, as he points out, was operated and owned by the mafia, as were a lot of New York City bars and establishments. It was late in June of 1969 that the police raided that inn. Why did they raid it? Because homosexual acts were illegal. This was a bar that especially catered to homosexuality, lesbianism, sexual activity in general. But homosexual acts were legal, and the bar was operating without a license. So there was certainly reason for the police to raid the bar that night. It says the raid began in the early hours of the night, approximately 200 people at the bar. And he mentions in the book, and we'll get into this, that it was almost like a spirit that came over the crowd. People were agitated, unruly. Next thing you know, they're yelling and screaming, and then they're grabbing objects. They're whipping them at the police. Mm-hmm. In other words, it got out of hand in a hurry. But as we've seen, in crowd situations like that, sometimes it is a demonic spirit that really overtakes the group, and there's just a corporate sense of
riot mentality,
riot, rage, anger, and so at this situation, the police were so concerned for their own safety that they ran into the inn that they had just cleared, and began barricading the door. And then this mob that was outside started trying to bust their way in. And their goal obviously being to go after the police officers, try to break through the barricade. Eventually, police came and rescued their fellow officers. But what happened is this was like a powder keg that got set off, and it led to multiple days and weeks of rioting and anger and protest and everything in the city of New York. At the time, no one heard of this Stonewall. And it was a fringe thing. It was on the fringes of society. The behaviors that were taking place in there were certainly not mainstream, not acceptable behaviors, at least publicly accepted. As, like I say, it was against the law in 1969. And so what Kahn points out was Stonewall was a key part in the reopening of doors that had been closed since ancient times. As we've highlighted, when the gospel came, all of this kind of behavior that was part of Ishtar and her temple prostitutes and so forth, that involved transvestitism, homosexuality, transgenderism, all of that was driven out. When the gospel came in, biblical morality and sexual ethics were celebrated, and all that behavior was driven out. But now, he says, in the midst of that crowd, the goddess was reappearing, and those involved, he says, were merely pawns who had no idea what was taking place in the realm of the spirit. And he asked this question: was there a reason that what happened that night had to take place in New York City? And second question, is it possible that the reason goes back to the goddess and her mythology? So, two great questions there. Why New York City, and what was the connection to the goddess Ishtar? He points out Ishtar was always the one who was drawn to gates. I think there was some ancient artwork that shows her standing between two walls of a gate. What was the other thing? One of the most famous of all the archaeological remains is that of Ishtar's gate that opened the way to the city of Babylon. So, wow, talk about a demonic picture there. Gates opening to a city known in Scripture as being a city of demons, evil, almost the epitome. And when you think about Babylon in Scripture, that's the epitome of evil and wickedness. It was her nature, though, to open gates that were closed because she was by nature a trespasser of boundaries. And so now Ishtar, if Ishtar's coming to America, she has to find where the gates are, and then by her nature, she is going to force those gates open. And so when you think about the gateway to America, there's one very clear gateway marked by a statue that welcomes people from all different nations. Mm-hmm. It's a city, again, that's a leading city in fashion and culture and commerce and entertainment and the arts and commodities and all the business sector. Mm-hmm. And of course, we're talking about New York City. Right. So it's no surprise that Stonewall and what took place at Stonewall is located in the gateway city to American life and culture. He says here, the Statue of Liberty lifts up her lamp, quote, beside the golden door. And so the golden door, the gateway, is New York City. Now, in the mythology of Ishtar's descent into the underworld, she stands at the gate and she calls out, and she says, "Gatekeeper, ho, open your gate that I may enter." So we have her, again, in ancient history, making a statement to the gatekeeper, "Let me in." And if she's not going to be willingly let in, she will find a way to knock the gate down and get in because, again, that's what her nature is. So we find this whole commonality of gates. She would not be kept out. So in the summer of 1969, the goddess came to the gate and to Stonewall. And as he says, that night her spirit would indwell the multitude and would demand the long closed door be open to them. So here you have this whole subculture of homosexuality, lesbianism, transvestites, transgender, that found a home in Stonewall. That was their subculture. When the police show up and begin to arrest some people, in fact, that night there was several transvestites that they demanded to see their identification, that's when the mob started getting unruly. And basically what's happening in the spirit is these people demanding, basically, let us into society, let us through the gates, let us become normal, mainstream, accept who we are, et cetera, which has been the whole battle cry of this movement from day one. So that was the first thing. Go ahead.
I thought her affiliation with Gates is very interesting, because right now that's one of our major crises in America is our gateways.
Right.
or
the tearing down.
The tearing down, right. Yeah. And there's this idea that's propagating in our culture today that walls are bad, boundaries are bad.
Yep.
Open gates is good, right? Yep. Somebody made a comment, some guy trying to make a smart comment. I forgot during whatever. Like leaders don't build walls, leaders build bridges, or whatever it is. Like gateways. We want to be connected to everybody. We want to be, and there's this underlying like, and I get that perspective. Like, yeah, we do want to be connected to people. We want to collaborate. We want to reach out to our community. We don't want to be isolationists. Exactly. But there is a place for walls.
Well, to me, this highlights the secularist defective worldview because they fail to recognize moral rights and wrongs, good versus evil, and they absolutely are blinded to the fact that human nature is twisted and broken.
It needs walls.
We need to reestablish the walls on our own nature, and that's why Christ came.
Right.
But it's this naive view that somehow, if we just knock down all the walls and we just open up all of the planet so we can come and go as we please, and we're citizens of planet Earth, that we're all going to live happily ever after.
Yeah, and all these people who say these things have the biggest house with the biggest gates in their own house.
Well, and that's true. The biggest security
details.
Yep.
Yeah, it's because practically that doesn't make sense. It sounds good ideologically, but if you have a house without walls, you don't even call it a house. You just call it a garage or a carport. And the idea is we need walls sometimes in our lives. We all need boundaries. That's why bedrooms have walls, right? And bathrooms have walls, thank God.
Well, every law establishes a wall. Hey, 55 miles an hour. Well, that's a speed limit law. It's a wall that says, please do not exceed this wall, or you're going to hurt people, or you can be hurt. All right, it's not safe. And every law establishes that. So, again, it's just a horrible naivete to believe that we don't need any boundaries, and that we don't need any boundaries sexually. And we're talking about this. I encourage everybody, if you haven't tuned into our Sunday morning for the last few weeks, we're talking about men and women in Christ, and we're talking about God-ordained and God-established creational norms. We might call those walls. There are walls between men and women. God made them differently. There are walls between what is acceptable sexuality and what is not. And when you transgress those walls, or you tear the walls down, or you act like they're not important, that's when you get into open rebellion against God, and it never ends well. Yeah. And so, again, tear down the walls, free love, love is love. Even that statement, love is love, is a statement with no walls whatsoever. What is that? Any definition is a wall, right? It's a wall around a term. What is love? Can you please define it? Can you please help me draw a wall around it so I know how love is different from hate, for instance, all of life has to have creational boundaries and definitions. And again, we get those things from our worldview. And if we reject God and we reject the Judeo-Christian worldview, we live in this fake world. And eventually, I just saw where another one of these prosecuting attorneys is pushing for the non-arrest of people who just commit theft. So we're not going to arrest anybody just for thievery. How in the world can you have any kind of a marketplace? How can you run a business if the government allows people to come in and just steal whatever they want, and you have this weird belief that somehow you're not going to prosecute people for theft?
Well, because those guys were elected by George Soros, whose organization is called Open Society.
No, absolutely,
there's
right.
a spiritual. I don't know the dude, but there's a spiritual element to. So even talking about Ishtar and Gates, there is that connotation of like openness is good and open to the world is good, And I think we as Christians need to recognize that God has put boundaries on this earth. Like gravity is a boundary.
Yeah.
Like you jump off a building, you're gonna fall. That's a boundaries. And certain boundaries that God has created, we ought to respect because they're a reflection of who He is.
That's good.
And we need to identify which are good boundaries and which are bad boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. If you took down all the fences, I think of a lot of places where, thank God for a fence. It reminds you, hey, don't go there.
Yeah.
It's dangerous. Hey, don't keep walking past this fence. You're going to fall off a cliff, And unfortunately, we're witnessing what happens when you have an ungodly view of reality. In fact, you're out of touch with reality. Yeah.
Well, what's the phrase? Like, before you tear down the fence, I want to make sure why it was up there in the first place.
That's right. Yeah. Who erected this fence and why? Because there's probably a good reason, right?
This a quick story. I was in Taiwan. It was right before I finished my mission trip to come back to the States. I was a young guy. I was 22, 23 years old, and we went to the edge of the island and the ocean. It was stormy. The waves are hitting hard, and there's a fence that says, hey, there's a gate that says, don't go across that. Me and my friend were like,
you did it.
Whatever. We went across trying to get a good picture of the waves behind it. And when a wave hit me so hard, almost swept me into the ocean, which I would have been dead. And it hit me against the rocks, and I got cut all over my body. And when we came back, I saw that gate. I was like, okay, I now understand why that. Because I thought I was invincible. I thought, whatever, I'm better than this gate. And when she ushered me back, I'm like hobbling because I got scraped up so bad. I got hit hard by the waves. Wow. As we closed that gate, I'm like, I need to respect gates better.
So I got my own mission story. It was the free days that were always the worst.
Yeah, exactly.
Not sharing the gospel.
I was like, am I considered a martyr if I die on a sightseeing trip?
Yeah, because you jumped over a fence and got swept away by a
that
wave.
doesn't count.
No, that would not.
That would not count.
Yeah.
No.
So we're in charge of 3 teams of teenagers, and on the free day, everybody goes out and does whatever, and the team leader's in charge. Well, everybody came back for dinner, and we're missing an entire third of our team. And we're like, where is, this is before, the cell phones and all that kind of stuff. Right. So what had happened was they crawled over a fence, hiking up a mountain.
Okay, yeah.
And what they didn't realize was the fog would come in at a certain time every day.
Yeah.
And if you weren't off the mountain, you were trapped on the mountain in fog. You could see like a foot in front of yourself.
Goodness.
They're walking along a path that they should not be on because that was what the fence was for. And if they take a step to the right, there's like hundreds of feet drop to their sure death. And these are teenagers walking through the fog on the edge of a cliff, all because the team leader disregarded a fence.
Yeah.
So, these are powerful pictures of. We better figure out why those fences were put there.
You better figure out why somebody put that fence there and stop thinking we're better than these fences.
Yeah, we're smarter. We don't need fences.
Yeah.
No, fences are good. And borders are good, and boundaries are good, and we better get back to them. Well, that's all the time we've got for this podcast. But next week we're going to pick up some interesting convergences again as it relates to Stonewall, as it relates to the gates, and some other interesting things historically that come together to highlight the re-entrance of Ishtar into American culture. So you won't want to miss it.